I've been just listening in up to this point, and I think there are very few who would disagree with a lot of what's been said. I think people sort of intuit at some level, or having been in the field and being in ministry for many years, people sort of understand there's a balance. There's a balancing act there between the self and between others, between avoiding forms of asceticism on one hand, and self-indulgence on the other. Or self-centeredness, like we've been saying. But I want to sort of maybe just shift the direction of the conversation a little bit. My background, I spent a few years in emergency services, which is really high stress work. And going through Sandy actually was when the Hurricane Sandy over here was the moment when I decided this is not for me. You know what I mean? Because it's so stressful, and self-care becomes so apparent as extremely important. So I want to sort of think about, as we're already heading into kettle season, which in many of the conversations I have with leaders across, throughout the week and over the years, they talk about kettles as in terms of like they go into crisis mode, and they'll even use that language, and they'll talk about how they crash and they almost don't make it through the season. And so I wonder, can we offer something to these people, because it's under blue sky conditions, the other 10 months of the year, keeping the Sabbath is more manageable, right? You can go get a haircut, you have the time, but what can we offer to people who are going through kettles, which is a crisis, which is a form of crisis for many?
How
do the rules change?
Well, I think I would probably want to start off, and this is, people that hear this may say that's not realistic for me. But I think that under times of great stress, and it sounds like kettle season is a time of great stress, I have to be more intentional, not less. And so I have to somehow be able to carve out some space to be much more intentional about self-care. If I have some bad sleeping habits or something like that, maybe I need to be more intentional to get sufficient sleep, to get a healthy meal, those kinds of things, not less, which I think under the pressure, I'm likely to do less care of myself. I think during those times, we actually have to do more. I have to be much more intentional. So that's probably where I would want to start.
I think there's a dynamic with kettles in particular, and this is the time of year that we're going in. And one of the comments on Facebook, I think, was there's a timely conversation. One of the dimensions with that is we've been heretofore talking about ministry as others focus and people. Sometimes the nature of kettle ministry and Christmas ministry even can make it feel like a detached sort of an activity, where you don't feel like you're actually making a difference sometimes in people's life, because there is so much logistical work behind it, so much of that kind of other sort of busy work behind it, driving and so forth. And so that probably plays into it. And I'm sorry to have cut you off, Commissioner Rader. Please let me give you room here to speak.
Oh, well, I was just thinking, kettles is just one area of the busyness of this season. If it were only kettles, I think most people could manage pretty well. But it's not just kettles, because I've been there, and I know that in the midst of doing kettles, where you think, this is not 24/7, this is 48, whatever, and I don't have that many hours in the day, and it takes that much time and that much effort to get this done. But right in the middle of kettles, someone calls and says, "I've got 500 pounds of candy I'm going to bring over. What are you going to do with the 500 pounds of candy?" So you've got kettles, you've got the candy, you've got the toy shop, you have, Angel Tree. We could go on. And how do you find time? And I think the idea of being more intentional is so important. You may have to get up a little bit earlier, or just sneak some time in the middle of the day when you go off somewhere, and don't tell anybody where you're going, and sneak into a little chapel, or go someplace that is very quiet and a place that ministers to you physically and spiritually, and just spend some time, praying. But my own experience of actually standing on kettles is that standing on kettles can provide incredible ministry opportunities, and those opportunities, when people open up their hearts to you, when they come up to the kettle and start talking to you, and you hear their stories and you feel refreshed after they leave.
Yeah.
I think the worst thing is when nobody comes up to the kettle and you're just standing there ringing the bell, and that's very tiring and difficult, and especially if it's really cold, which our kettle experience in Korea was always, and also in New York, but so cold. But I remember one experience, and actually we were standing in front of the Trump Tower in New York, and at the last day of kettles, it was supposedly the coldest year that they had ever known. December they'd ever known. And we were standing right in front of a very exclusive store. Actually, they had to recognize you before they would open the door for you to come into this store. It was jewelry store. The two men in there, because our little, my partner and I, our little tape recorder broke, they came out and fixed the tape recorder for us. And the last day, actually, ice was on my eyelashes, and I was, when I went into their store, it's the ice started to melt and run down my face, and I'm in this exclusive store, and we went in just to say thank you for coming and helping us. And this man started to cry. This guy who's dressed in a tuxedo, and he's selling, the best of the best. And he said, you know what? What you're doing out there is really Christmas. What we're doing in here is nothing. And he just stood there bawling. We had an opportunity to share Christ with him. So those are the things that put a new face on kettles. and you pray for that, to happen. Also, kettles are an opportunity. They're providing an opportunity for people who cannot send money through the mail, little kids, people who don't have very much, but they want to share. It's providing an opportunity for them to give.
Yeah.
And you're there to provide that opportunity and to try to relate to them. Now, that is not going to solve all the problems of fatigue, I realize. And like I say, there are the contingencies that come in that add to the kettle stress. But I think I do think we need to, and I really agree with Dr. Headley, that we have to be intentional. We have to find time to, as it said in King James, to come apart from what is happening, and find a place to meditate and pray.
And perhaps even have a plan for those things that's kind of well articulated,
exactly.
or at least articulated to some degree. Like this morning, I wasn't planning on joining the conversation, but suddenly I was asked to, and then so I just went online and found this list of the big list of self-care activities, and so you can sort of check off, which of these things really kind of add value and reinvigorate me in times of stress. And there's play video games. No, that's not for me. But there's go for a run, get a haircut.
Running is great.
Get a haircut. Write a poem. So you can sort of check off these things and just I'll post this on the in the comments, and maybe people will find it helpful.
That's good.
And Matt, going back to the EDS comparison, there's a emergency disaster plan. I mean, they have a plan in place. If something like this, if a crisis happens, this is what we're going to do. That's an emergency disaster plan. And of course, Christmas is not a crisis. We know it's coming every year. But at the same time, if you've got a plan for self-care that says, I'm going to do these things, there's a name for that. And I remember when I was at Asbury Theological Seminary, we had to create one. And it was in a class that I think Dr. Headley taught.
Are you talking about a rule of life?
Rule of life. That's what it's called.
Yeah. And I think the rule of life, Commissioner Rader included being intentional spiritually. But I also think we can be intentional in a number of the other areas. The intentional amount of time that we spend with our families, because families and social support tends to buffer us during times of stress. I would also suggest some physical activity if there's something that you really enjoy, whether it's running. For me, it's playing soccer. Those are always good distressors, and also they tend to elevate mood. Yeah. So being engaged in some physical activity or exercise. But I think you're right, Matt, that we need to find something that works for us.
Works for us.
Not everything is going to work for everyone. You have to find those things that energize you. When you're working, whether it's kettles or whatever, those things may be drainers. And to balance that, you have to find some energizers. Yeah. So each of us should start to think about what are some of the things that really energizes me, that gets my blood pumping and gets me going. Let me engage in those things. And they may be active, or they may be like writing a poem. Find things that you enjoy and engage in them.
Yeah, and I think there's something, obviously I agree with that, but I think there's also, a common thing that people is a stumbling block is that, I don't have the time to do that. It's go. There's this, like we talked about, this frenetic activity that's in our DNA and stuff like that. And I think there's something really powerful in saying no. You know what I mean? Saying I'm gonna walk away from this for the next 10 minutes and just decompress, breathe, pray, whatever it is. But that no is always in service of a deeper affirmation, so you can continue to work out of an excess. So you're always staying filled.
And give yourself permission to sit down and write that poem.
Yeah.
Give yourself permission. Give yourself, the order. Our time is running close to its end. I want to give you each a chance to speak, one more time, say some final thoughts. But just now, I want to thank you for taking your time to do this. I value your time. I value your expertise, the insights that you have gained through formal and informal ways, through years of ministry and so forth, from serving the church and serving the servants of God in significant ways. And so, we're not talking of self-care as a matter of running away from ministry. It can be ministry as a part of that self-care continuum, and we need to see it in balance and so forth. I just want to give you each a chance to speak. Perhaps Dr. Headley, if you could give us some final words, and then Commissioner Rader, if you could close us up, that would be wonderful.
3 quick points. Self-care is a basis for other care. I think that's important to understand. That's one of the things that it does. Secondly, when Matt talked about saying no is a basic boundary-making word. And without setting some boundaries, we're going to have chaos. And the other thing is that in that Genesis creation narrative, God is able to walk away. So there is an end to every creative day. And I think what God is doing there is modeling for us. So that's my final words.
Thank you. And Commissioner Rader.
I have a book called Doing Member Care Well, and it's edited by Kelly O'Donnell. And I thought it was very interesting. She mentions 4 metaphors of things that are really debilitating, and they're things that workers struggle with and often encounter in trying to be acceptable servants of God. First of all, I'd like to say before I share this that I think we need to be intentional also about not letting other people influence us as to what we should do about our own self-care, because sometimes we become intimidated by other people. And one of the things that she mentions is similar to that, but she says there are giants, foxes, wolves, and flies. And the giants are the big people that disable us. They tell us we're not fit to do the task, or we think they're telling us that. So we listen to them. We think they're looking down on us. It kills our confidence. The foxes are the little distractions, little foxes that spoil the vine. You're going to go off and write a poem, but somebody comes by and says, you need to do this. So you don't get to do that. And the wolves are the distressing things, like disillusions in people, and disillusionment, disappointment with people you're working with, and you start thinking about that. It's kind of like you think of them as wolves in sheep's clothing, and then you start feeling the effects. And then the flies are when we know that we should be doing something, but we do the things that we like to do rather than do what we know we ought to do. And her her remedy for that is spot and swat. So I think with some others that I have read is that some of these things limit us physically, mentally, and spiritually, and cause us to come up unfit in all ways, all of these ways. And we just need to be alert and to stay on guard. We need to guard our hearts. We need to guard our thoughts and our decisions. And I love the idea of saying no from time to time. You have to, and that frees you up, and you can live, like Eugene Peterson said, freely and lightly